Unaware of my true identity, she gave me her first kiss, and I gave her my last name. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The rain was falling hard over downtown Seattle that night, a steady rhythm against the glass windows of a small corner cafe that never truly slept. The sign above the door flickered in the cold wind, Moonbeam Coffee. Inside, the world felt warmer, a hum of soft jazz, the hiss of milk steaming, and the faint scent of cinnamon that clung to the air. Behind the counter stood Lila Tran, a 24-year-old barista working her third shift of the week. Her apron was faded, her shoes soaked through, but her smile remained gentle, practiced, brave. The clock on the wall read 10:47 p.m. She still had 40 minutes before closing, 40 minutes until she could catch the late bus back to her rented room the size of a closet. When the door swung open, a gust of rain followed. Standing there was a delivery man, drenched from head to toe, holding an empty insulated bag. His name, though she did not know it yet, was Ethan Gray. To her, he was just another exhausted face in the city. To the world, he was the 32-year-old founder of Gray Labs, a tech empire worth billions. But tonight, in worn jeans and a delivery jacket, he looked almost invisible. Their eyes met. He hesitated at the door, dripping water onto the tile. "Sorry," he said, his voice low, roughened by the cold. "I just need a place to wait out the rain." Lila reached for a towel behind the counter and handed it to him with a faint smile. "You can sit wherever you want. I was about to close, but it looks like the storm decided otherwise." He laughed softly, surprised by her warmth. She turned away to the espresso machine, poured milk into a steel jug, and said over her shoulder, "Do you like hot chocolate?" He blinked, confused. "What?" "Hot chocolate," she repeated, her tone teasing. "The real kind, not the powder stuff. You look like you need it more than I do." A few minutes later, she placed a steaming cup in front of him. The mug was white, chipped near the handle, with faded black letters that read, "Be kind anyway." He stared at it for a long moment before wrapping his hands around the warmth. "You did not have to do that," he murmured. "No one has to do anything," she said, wiping the counter. "But it is nice when they still choose to." For a while, they sat in comfortable silence. The storm roared outside. The lights flickered once, and Lila laughed nervously. "I hate thunder," she admitted. "Then I guess I will stay until it passes," Ethan said. "Someone has to make sure the barista survives." Something about the way he said it, light, kind, unpretentious, made her chest tighten. She noticed his hands, rough but clean, and the way his eyes studied her, not with judgment, but with quiet curiosity. "What about you?" she asked. "Do you do deliveries every night?" He smiled faintly. "Something like that." "Well, if you ever get tired of it," she said, "we are hiring part-time. Pay is bad, but the company is good." He laughed, the sound warm and real. "I will keep that in mind." When the clock finally hit 11:30, the storm had eased into drizzle. She locked the front door and turned to him. "Thank you for keeping me company," she said. "Thank you for the hot chocolate," he replied. He reached into his pocket and set a crumpled $20 bill on the counter. She pushed it back toward him. "You left your tip right there in that cup." He looked down at the mug, "Be kind anyway," and smiled like he had just been given something money could not buy. As she waved goodbye, she had no idea that the quiet man she had just helped was the same Ethan Gray whose name she had written in her scholarship essay months ago, the man who would soon change her life forever. The following morning, the sky over Seattle had cleared, but the streets were still wet, gleaming under the weak sunlight. Lila Tran tightened her scarf and hurried toward the university campus, her backpack heavy with textbooks and the faint scent of coffee clinging to her sleeves. She had only slept 4 hours after closing the cafe, but she did not complain. Sleep was a luxury. Rent, tuition, and bus fare were priorities. As she passed the glass front of a nearby office building, her reflection caught her eye. Same secondhand coat, same messy ponytail, same tired smile. She whispered under her breath, "Be kind anyway," the words from that chipped mug echoing in her mind. She did not know why she kept thinking about that stranger from last night, the delivery man with quiet eyes and a calm voice. Maybe it was his smile, or maybe it was the way he listened without interrupting a rare thing in her world. Ethan Gray, however, had not forgotten her either. In his penthouse office, 30 floors above the city, the blinds were open to the bright morning. He was no longer in a soaked delivery jacket, but in a tailored charcoal suit. His assistant stood nearby, reading out the morning reports, but Ethan's thoughts drifted. On his desk sat a small white mug, its faded letters still visible, "Be kind anyway." He had taken it from the cafe without realizing it until this morning. Now, it sat beside his laptop like a reminder of something real. "Mr. Gray," his assistant prompted, "are you still considering that undercover project?" Ethan nodded. "Yes, extend it another month. I want to see what happens when people do not know who I am." The assistant hesitated. "Understood. Should I schedule the outreach visit for the community kitchen this weekend?" "Do it," he said, "and find out if Moonbeam Coffee needs any equipment upgrades." Quietly. 2 days later, the cafe was busy again. The smell of roasted beans mixed with the sound of laughter and the clatter of mugs. Lila was behind the counter, hair tied back, sleeves rolled up, trying to manage a long line of customers when a familiar voice spoke up. "Hot chocolate," the man said. "The real kind, not the powder stuff." Her head snapped up. There he was, the same man from that rainy night, but this time he looked different. The jacket was newer, his posture straighter, and there was a quiet confidence about him. "Back again?" she asked, smiling before she could stop herself. He shrugged, pretending to look at the pastry case. "Could not get that taste out of my head." "You mean the drink or the company?" she teased. His eyes softened. "Both." They talked while the machine hissed and steamed. She learned his name Ethan and that he was between jobs, though he said it with an easy laugh that did not quite match the truth. He asked about her classes, her art, her dream. She told him she wanted to open a small cafe one day, one that would let anyone come in even if they could not pay. He listened, as if every word mattered. When she handed him the drink, he looked at her sketchbook lying open on the counter. "You draw?" "Mostly for myself," she said, embarrassed. "It helps me breathe when things get hard." He picked up the sketch of a coffee shop under fairy lights, with people smiling inside. "This place looks happy." "It is how I wish the world could be," she said softly. "Then build it," he replied. "Even small happiness matters." His phone buzzed. A corporate ringtone, sharp and expensive. He silenced it quickly, hoping she would not notice. But she did. There was something about him that did not fit the picture of a struggling delivery driver. His hands were too clean, his words too measured. Still, she brushed the thought aside. He had been kind when he did not have to be. That was all she needed to know. Before leaving, Ethan pulled a 20 from his wallet. "For the drink," he said. Lila shook her head. "You already paid with your company." He smiled, slipping the bill under the mug anyway. "Consider it an investment in your dream." She laughed, shaking her head as he walked out into the afternoon Sunday. That night, after closing, she found a folded note under the register. It was written on the receipt paper from that morning. "Keep the kindness alive. You never know who it might reach." She held the paper to her chest and smiled without realizing she was crying. Across town, Ethan watched the rain begin again from his glass office window. He thought of her hands, her laugh, the way she had said, "No one deserves to be wet alone." For the first time in years, he felt something more than ambition. He felt the quiet pull of humanity he had almost forgotten. He reached for his phone and called his assistant. "Set up the community event sooner," he said. "Which one, sir?" "The soup kitchen. And add Moonbeam Coffee to the sponsors list. I want to be there in person." As he hung up, the city lights shimmered through the drizzle. Somewhere across town, a girl who had nothing had given him something he could not buy a reason to care again, and he was not going to waste it. The weekend came with a sharp wind and gray clouds drifting over the city. The community kitchen, tucked between 2 brick buildings near Pike Street, buzzed with quiet energy. Volunteers moved in rhythm, stacking trays, ladling soup, handing out bread. The smell of tomato and basil filled the air, mixing with rain that still clung to everyone's coats. Lila Tran stood behind the serving counter, wearing an oversized apron and a tired smile. She had promised to spend her Saturday helping here, even though she had an art assignment due. "Kindness first," she had written in her notebook that morning. It was something she told herself whenever life felt too heavy. She looked up when the door opened and felt her heart skip. Ethan Gray stood in the entryway, carrying 2 boxes of canned food. He looked different again, no delivery jacket, no suit, just a gray hoodie and jeans. His smile was the same, though, calm and disarming. "Need an extra hand?" he asked. She blinked in surprise. "You again?" "Could not stay away," he said lightly. "You said this place could use help. I figured I would test that theory." "Welcome to the chaos," she said, handing him gloves. They worked side by side for hours. He poured soup while she passed bread, their movements syncing naturally. Lila teased him for being slow, and he laughed when she spilled flour on her apron. Between laughter and silence, something unspoken grew. When the crowd thinned, they took a short break outside. The sky had softened into a pale gold sunset, and steam rose from the pots inside the kitchen. Lila leaned against the wall, sipping tea from a paper cup. Ethan stood beside her, hands in his pockets, watching the sky. "You know," she said, "most people would rather spend their weekends sleeping or scrolling on their phones." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I got tired of both." "You talk like someone who has lived 2 lives." He glanced at her, thoughtful. "Maybe I have." There was a silence that did not feel awkward. The air between them was full of small sounds, the buzz of traffic, a distant siren, the flap of a wet newspaper caught in the wind. Then Lila spoke again, her voice quiet. "When I was little, my dad always said, if you can make one person smile in a day, that day counts. I think about that a lot, even now." Ethan nodded slowly. "He sounds like a good man." "He was," she said softly. "He died when I was 14. After that, it was just my mom and me. She works in a nursing home now. I guess kindness runs in the family." He wanted to tell her everything right then, that he was not a delivery worker, not a volunteer, not even the ordinary man she thought he was. But the words stuck in his throat. The truth felt heavy, and the moment felt fragile. So he said instead, "Your father would be proud of you." Her eyes glistened. "I hope so." The following week, Moonbeam Coffee buzzed with unusual excitement. A local charity had chosen the cafe to host a small kindness drive. A flyer on the window read, "Sponsored by Gray Labs Foundation." Lila barely noticed the name, too busy rearranging tables and hanging lights. Ethan had promised to come, but she had not seen him since that Saturday. When the evening arrived, the cafe glowed with warm light. Students, neighbors, and volunteers filled the room. Lila moved behind the counter, her hands steady even though her heart was racing. Then she saw him, Ethan, standing near the back, holding a tray of pastries. He caught her gaze and smiled, but before she could walk over, someone called out from the small stage, "Please welcome our special guest from Gray Labs Foundation, Mr. Ethan Gray." The room erupted in applause. Lila froze. For a moment, she could not move. Her eyes darted from the speaker to the man she thought she knew. Ethan walked up to the microphone, the stage lights catching his face. He looked calm, but there was a shadow of regret in his eyes. "Good evening," he began. "This event is about kindness, the kind that does not look for reward. I have spent years building technology that connects people, but somewhere along the way, I forgot how to connect myself. Until a few weeks ago, I met someone who reminded me what real connection means." He glanced toward her, and the room seemed to fade. Lila felt the floor tilt beneath her. The people around her blurred into whispers. After the event ended, she slipped out the back door into the rain. She could not face him. Not now. She walked fast, her heart pounding. Footsteps followed. "Lila," he called. "Please wait." She stopped under a streetlight, rain streaking her cheeks. So it was all fake? The deliveries, the community work, was that some kind of test? "No," he said quickly. "It started as a project, but then it became real. You were real. You let me believe you were struggling like me." Her voice cracked. "I opened up to you." "I know," he said, "and I am sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I just wanted to see the world without people pretending around me." She shook her head. "You could have told me the truth. I was afraid you would walk away." "You were right," she said softly. "I am walking away now." She turned and left him standing there, the rain soaking through his expensive suit, his heart sinking with every step she took. For the first time in years, Ethan Gray, the man who owned everything, felt completely powerless. As the cafe lights dimmed behind him, he looked down at the wet sidewalk. The water around his feet reflected the faint words printed on the mug he still held in his hand. "Be kind anyway." He closed his eyes and whispered to himself, "Then I will start with honesty." Days passed, and the rain did not stop. Seattle seemed to mirror the mood that hung over both of them: gray skies, restless wind, and the sound of water finding every crack in the pavement. Lila Tran threw herself into work, keeping her hands busy so her thoughts would stay quiet. The cafe felt emptier now, even when it was full. Every time the door opened, she half expected him to walk in, drenched again, smiling like he had that first night. But he never did. The chipped mug that said, "Be kind anyway," sat on the shelf behind her, and she could not bring herself to use it. Meanwhile, in a sleek glass tower overlooking the same city, Ethan Gray sat at his desk, unable to focus on the glowing numbers on his screen. Meetings blurred, contracts lost meaning, and every time someone mentioned brand image or public relations, he heard only her voice. "You let me believe you were struggling like me." He replayed that night outside the cafe over and over in his head. He had tried to call, but she did not answer. He wrote a letter, then tore it up. The truth was simple. All his wealth and intelligence could not fix what he had broken. A week later, Gray Labs faced a storm of its own. A journalist had published an article titled, "The Billionaire Who Pretended to Be Poor." Photos of Ethan in his delivery jacket were splashed across headlines. Critics called it insensitive social experimentation. Investors demanded explanations. Ethan called an emergency meeting, but when the room filled with anxious executives, he did something none of them expected. He told the truth. "I went undercover to understand what it means to struggle," he said, voice steady. "But I ended up learning about kindness. One woman reminded me that empathy is not a strategy, it is a choice. I owe her more than I can ever repay." The room went silent. No one knew what to say. Afterward, he stepped into his private office and stared out at the rain-soaked skyline. His assistant entered quietly, holding an envelope. "This came from Moonbeam Coffee," she said. Ethan turned. The handwriting on the front stopped him cold. It was hers. He opened it carefully. Inside was a simple note. "You said kindness is a choice. So is forgiveness. I am still learning both." At the bottom was a small sketch, two hands holding the same mug. He exhaled, a breath he had not realized he was holding. That night, he left his car in the garage and walked through the drizzle to the small cafe on the corner. The open sign flickered weakly in the window. Inside, the tables were empty except for one. Lila sat there, a pencil in her hand, sketching quietly under the soft yellow light. When she looked up and saw him standing at the door, her heart jumped, but she did not move. He stepped closer, his shoes leaving wet prints on the floor. "I did not expect you to write," he said softly. "I did not expect you to read it," she replied. He sat across from her, the silence between them fragile but alive. "I am sorry," he said, "not just for lying, but for making you feel small. You were never part of an experiment. You were the only thing that felt real." Lila studied him. His face looked tired, older somehow. "Why are you here, Ethan?" "To start again," he said. "If you will let me." She leaned back, arms crossed. "You think one apology fixes everything?" "No," he said quietly. "But maybe honesty can." He reached into his coat and placed the mug between them. The same mug from the first night, its faded letters visible beneath the cafe light. "This belongs to you." She traced the rim of the mug with her finger. "You kept it." "I could not throw it away," he admitted. "It reminded me who I wanted to be." For a long time, they said nothing. The sound of rain outside filled the space between words. Then, without warning, the power flickered and went out. The cafe fell into darkness except for the dim light from the street lamp outside. Lila laughed softly. "Figures. Happens every storm." Ethan smiled, and in that moment, something in her chest softened. Maybe it was the sincerity in his eyes, or maybe it was the way he looked like the man she had met that first night, not a billionaire, not a CEO, just a human being trying to do better. When the lights returned, she spoke quietly. "I do not know if I can trust you yet." "I understand," he said. "Then let me earn it." "How?" she asked. "By building something that matters," he said. "Something for people like you. A foundation for students, small cafes, dreamers. Call it whatever you want. Just tell me what you need, and I will listen." She blinked, caught off guard. "You would do that?" "I already started," he said. "It is called the Be Kind Anyway Fund. You inspired it." Her breath caught. She looked at him for a long time before answering. "If this is real, then prove it." He nodded. "I will." Outside, the rain began to ease. The the city lights reflecting off puddles like fragments of hope. As Ethan left the cafe that night, he glanced back once through the window. Lila was still sitting there, sketching again, but this time there was a small smile on her lips. And for the first time in months, he smiled too, not as a billionaire, not as a man seeking redemption, but as someone finally learning what it meant to be kind anyway. 2 months later, the first morning of spring painted soft light across Seattle. The rain had finally given way to a sky clear enough for sunlight to reach the streets. At the small corner cafe, Moonbeam Coffee looked different now. The walls were newly painted, the tables freshly polished, and a small framed poster by the door read, "In partnership with the Be Kind Anyway Fund." Behind the counter, Lila Tran wiped down the espresso machine, humming to herself. Business had grown ever since the story of the fund spread online. Students, teachers, and workers came in not just for coffee, but for connection. Each cup carried the phrase, "Be Kind Anyway," printed in simple black letters. Ethan Gray had kept his promise. The foundation he started had begun sponsoring scholarships for working students and micro-grants for small community cafes. But what mattered most to him was this place, the one that had started everything. That morning, he walked in quietly, without his usual entourage or business suit. He wore a simple navy sweater and jeans, looking almost like the man she first met. When Lila saw him, she froze for half a second before smiling. "You are early," she said. He smiled back. "Old habits. I figured I would stop by before the meeting downtown." She poured him a cup of black coffee, slid it across the counter, and teased. "No hot chocolate today?" He chuckled. "I am trying to be an adult." "Good luck with that," she said, laughing. They sat at the same corner table as before, near the window where the morning sun pooled across the floor. The quiet between them was no longer tense. It was easy, familiar. "You know," Ethan said, stirring his coffee, "the first scholarship from the fund went out yesterday. A student named Mia got it. She wrote in her essay that her dream was to open a cafe one day." Lila's eyes lit up. "Really?" He nodded. "When I read it, I thought of you." Her cheeks flushed slightly. "That is good work, Ethan. You should be proud." He looked at her for a long moment. "I am proud, but not of the fund, of you. You kept believing in kindness, even after I gave you every reason not to." Lila set down her cup, her fingers tracing the rim. "I was angry," she admitted, "but I realized anger does not build anything. I just wanted to turn something painful into something useful." He smiled softly. "You did. More than you know." A brief silence followed, filled with the sound of footsteps outside and the faint music playing from the old cafe radio. Then Lila leaned forward slightly, her tone lighter. "So, how does it feel? Mr. Billionaire redeemed?" He laughed under his breath. "Still learning. I am trying to lead differently now, less boardroom, more people. Turns out it is harder than it looks." "Good," she said. "Growth should be uncomfortable." Ethan's phone buzzed. He silenced it immediately. "I am sorry," he said. "I promised myself I would not take calls when I am here." "That is fine," she said. "You do not owe me anything." He looked at her, eyes steady. "Maybe not, but I want to." He reached into his coat pocket and placed something small on the table. It was the same folded piece of receipt paper she had written months ago, the note that said, "Keep the kindness alive. You never know who it might reach." She blinked in surprise. "You still have this?" "I carry it everywhere," he said. "It reminds me why I started over." Outside, a gentle breeze stirred the bell above the cafe door. The light changed, spilling golden hues across the counter. For a moment, time seemed to slow. Lila met his gaze and saw something she had not noticed before. Tiredness, yes, but also sincerity, and something that looked a lot like hope. "Ethan," she said quietly, "you do not have to keep proving yourself to me. Just keep being that man." He nodded. "I will, but there is something else I want to prove." He stood and gestured for her to follow him outside. The street was bright, dotted with puddles that reflected the sunlight like tiny mirrors. Across from the cafe, a new sign had been installed on the brick wall. It read, "The Kindness Studio, a community art space." Lila covered her mouth with her hands. "What is this?" Ethan smiled. "Your sketchbook," he said. "Page 37, the one with fairy lights and people smiling. I had my team build it with local artists. It opens next week. It is under your name." She turned to him, eyes wide. "You did this?" "You did," he said gently. I just had the resources. Oh, her eyes filled with tears. I do not know what to say. Say you will let me be part of whatever comes next. For a long moment she could not speak. Then she nodded slowly. Okay, but no more secrets. Never again, he promised. They stood there together as the city moved around them, cars passing, people hurrying, the world unaware that something quiet and extraordinary was unfolding between two people who had once met by mistake. Ethan took a small step closer. Do you remember that night you gave me my first real smile in years? She smiled faintly. You mean the night I gave free hot chocolate to a stranger? He shook his head. The night you gave me a reason to believe again. The breeze carried the faint smell of roasted coffee and blooming cherry trees. Lila looked up at him and whispered, You really are impossible to forget. And you, he said, are impossible to replace. And as they stood there, sunlight spilling between them, Ethan reached for her hand. It was not grand, not dramatic, just real the way true beginnings always are. And for the first time, Lila no longer saw a billionaire in front of her. She saw Ethan, the man who had once stood in the rain, holding a mug that said, Be kind anyway, and for the first time, she let herself believe that kindness could become love. A month later, spring had fully arrived. The cherry blossoms along the sidewalks near Moonbeam Coffee painted the streets pink, their petals drifting across the open door of the cafe. Inside, Lila Tran arranged a vase of flowers on the counter. The morning rush had passed, and the place hummed with quiet music and the low murmur of conversation. Across town, the ribbon cutting for the Kindness Studio was about to begin. The new art space, funded by the Be Kind Anyway Foundation, was filled with sunlight, children's drawings, and the smell of fresh paint. Local reporters gathered, photographers adjusted their lenses, and a small crowd of students and volunteers waited for the ceremony to start. Ethan Gray stood near the entrance, wearing a simple gray suit with no tie, holding a pair of silver scissors in his hand. He looked calm on the surface, but his heart raced. This was the first time he would appear publicly since the undercover story had broken months ago. His publicist had advised him to focus on image recovery, but Ethan was not thinking about image. He was thinking about Lila. When she arrived, the crowd shifted slightly. She wore a pale blue dress and carried a small sketchbook in one hand. Ethan caught her eye and smiled, a quiet warmth passing between them that no one else seemed to notice. He stepped to the microphone. When I first started this project, I wanted to understand kindness, he began. But what I learned is that kindness is not a theory. It is a choice made by ordinary people every day. One of those people is standing here with us today. He turned toward her. Lila Tran, you showed me that true compassion does not need wealth or recognition. It just needs courage. This space exists because of you. Applause filled the room as he handed her the scissors. You should do the honors, he said. She laughed nervously but stepped forward and cut the ribbon. The crowd cheered as the doors opened, revealing walls lined with community art and a mural painted in soft gold letters, Be Kind Anyway. After the ceremony, people wandered inside to explore the exhibits. Lila found a small corner dedicated to her early sketches, ones she had drawn years ago on the back of cafe receipts. She touched the frame lightly, unable to believe it was real. Ethan walked up behind her. You used to draw this when the world felt too heavy, he said. Now it will help others carry theirs. She smiled. It feels like a dream. Then let us keep it real, he said softly. They walked to the rooftop terrace, away from the noise of the event. From there, the view stretched across the city, the same skyline that had once separated them. The afternoon light glowed gold over the building. You have changed a lot, she said, looking at him. I hope so, he replied. I spent too long chasing success. Now I just want to build something that lasts. Like this? She asked. He nodded. Like this, and like us, if you will let me. She hesitated, her fingers brushing the edge of her sketchbook. I do not know if I am ready for another story that ends with heartbreak. This one does not have to, he said. We can write it differently. For a long time, they stood in silence. Then Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Her eyes widened, but he did not open it yet. Instead, he placed it in her hands. This is not what you think, he said. It is not a ring. Not yet. It is a promise. She opened it carefully. Inside was the original cafe mug, repaired, cleaned, and glazed, so the words shone clearly again. Be kind anyway. He said quietly, "This is the first thing that connected us. It reminded me who I was before the money, before the title. I thought it belonged to me, but it never did. It was always yours." End quote. Lila felt tears blur her vision. "You kept it all this time. I could not let it go," he said. "And now, I want you to have it back, along with the truth that comes with it." She closed the box and looked up at him. "You really mean that, do you?" He smiled gently. "I do. Every word." A breeze swept across the rooftop, lifting a few cherry blossom petals into the air. Lila looked down at the city that had once felt so big, so impossible, and then back at the man who had learned to meet her halfway. "Ethan," she said softly, "you could have chosen anyone. Why me?" "Because you were the only one who saw me before I remembered how to see myself," he replied. "And you gave me something no one else could." "What is that?" "A reason to give my last name to someone for the right reasons this time." She laughed through her tears. "You are impossible, you know that?" He grinned. "I have been told." They stood together, the city glowing beneath them. The sound of laughter and music drifted up from the event below. Lila set the box on the railing and took his hand. "Maybe we can start with dinner," she said. "And no disguises this time." And nodded. "Deal. Just two people. No experiments." She squeezed his hand gently. "Then let us see where kindness takes us next." Endo. Below them, the golden letters on the mural caught the last light of the day, "Be kind anyway," shining like a quiet vow. And as they turned to leave the rooftop together, Ethan knew that for the first time in his life, he was no longer pretending to be anyone else. He was simply himself, a man in love with the woman who had taught him that kindness, when real, could change everything. Summer arrived quietly, carrying warmth into every corner of the city. The cherry blossoms had turned into green leaves, and the streets around Moonbeam Coffee smelled like roasted beans and sunshine. The cafe had never been busier. Lila Tran worked behind the counter most mornings, greeting customers with the same smile that once changed a stranger's life. Ethan Gray visited often, sometimes with his laptop, sometimes just to sit in the corner and watch her work. He never interfered, never acted like the man who could buy the whole block. He came as someone who belonged not as a billionaire, but as Ethan. The Be Kind Anyway fund had grown faster than either of them expected. Local news stations covered its impact, scholarships, community kitchens, and new art spaces opening across Washington. Each event carried the same simple motto that had once been printed on a chipped mug. One Thursday afternoon, Ethan arrived at the cafe just before closing. The sun was low, pouring golden light through the window. Lila was cleaning the espresso machine when she noticed him standing by the door, holding a brown envelope. "You look like you have news," she said, drying her hands. He smiled. "Maybe. Can we take a walk?" They left the cafe and headed toward the waterfront, where the air smelled of salt and summer rain. The water shimmered under the setting Sunday boats, drifted lazily in the distance. For a while, they walked in silence. Ethan handed her the envelope. "Open it." Inside was a printed contract and a small key. Her eyes scanned the document. "Ethan, what is this?" "It is the lease for the building next door to the studio," he said. "I bought it and transferred it to your name. It is for your cafe expansion, a second Moonbeam." Her hands trembled slightly. "You cannot just—" "I can," he said gently, "but only if you want it. You built this dream from nothing, Lila. I am just giving it room to grow." She looked up at him, the wind catching her hair. "You are serious?" He nodded. "Completely. You once told me you wanted a cafe where anyone could walk in, even if they had nothing. Now you can make that happen on a bigger scale." She swallowed hard, emotion rising in her throat. "You did not have to do this." "I know," he said, "but I wanted to, because you believed in me when I did not deserve it." For a moment, the world went still. Only the waves spoke, crashing softly against the pier. Lila stepped closer and rested a hand on his chest. "You always find a way to surprise me," he smiled. "Good surprises this time?" "The best kind," she said. They stood watching the horizon as the sky turned orange and pink. A street musician nearby began to play a slow tune on his guitar, the melody weaving through the air. Ethan reached for her hand. "Do you remember the first time we met?" "Of course," she said, laughing softly. "You were a drenched delivery man with a bad haircut." "And you were the only person in that whole city who offered me warmth," he said. "That night, I thought I was testing kindness, but it turned out kindness was testing me." She squeezed his hand. "And you passed." He looked at her then, really looked at her the woman who had turned his world upside down with nothing more than honesty and compassion. The city lights began to blink on behind them, reflecting across the water like small stars. "I used to think power meant control," he said quietly. "Now I think it means the ability to do good and the courage to love without fear." Lila smiled, her eyes glistening. "Then I guess you finally became the man you wanted to be." "Maybe," he said, "but only because of you." They watched the last trace of sunlight disappear beyond the horizon. The key in her hand caught the glow, shining faintly between their fingers. And in that quiet, golden moment, neither of them said another word. They did not need to. The promise between them was already written in the waves, in the wind, and in every act of kindness that had brought them here. By the end of summer, the second Moonbeam Cafe opened its doors. It was smaller than the first, tucked into a quiet corner beside the Kindness Studio, but it carried the same heart. The walls were covered with local art, and a shelf near the counter displayed stories from scholarship students helped by the Be Kind Anyway Fund. Above the entrance hung a simple wooden sign that read, "Kindness tastes better." The morning of the opening, sunlight poured through the large windows, bouncing off the polished tables. Lila Tran stood behind the counter, her apron neatly tied, her hands trembling just slightly. She looked around the space she had dreamed of for years. Everything felt unreal, the smell of fresh pastries, the laughter of volunteers, the sound of coffee being poured into ceramic cups. Ethan Gray entered quietly, holding a small bouquet of white tulips. When she saw him, her eyes softened. "You are early," she said with a smile. "I wanted to see this place before the cameras and crowds arrive," he replied. He handed her the flowers. "These reminded me of you." She placed them in a vase by the window. "You always know how to make a morning feel special." As the doors opened and people began to fill the cafe, Ethan stepped back to watch her greet the first customers. She moved with grace and confidence, her laughter spreading warmth through the room. He had attended countless business openings in his life, but this one felt different. There were no investors, no press releases, no speeches about profit. Only people, stories, and the quiet miracle of something built from the heart. When the crowd thinned, Lila joined him near the door. "You know, when I started working at the first Moonbeam, I never imagined this," she said. "Back then, I just wanted to survive the next rent payment." He smiled. "And now you are building a community." She laughed softly. "With your help." "With your strength," he corrected. "I only followed your lead." The two of them walked outside to where the sunlight painted the sidewalk gold. The breeze carried the scent of roasted coffee and blooming tulips from a nearby stand. Across the street, children from the art studio waved at them, their hands covered in paint. Lila waved back, her heart full. Ethan turned to her. "There is something I have been meaning to ask," he said. She tilted her head. "You sound serious." "I am," he said. "We have built so much together, the fund, the studio, these cafes. But I want to build one more thing, something just for us." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. This time, it was not a mug or a promise, it was a ring. Simple, elegant, shining softly in the morning light. Lila gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Ethan." He smiled, nervous but sure. "You once gave me your first kiss without knowing who I was. Today, I want to give you my last name, knowing exactly who you are. Lila Tran, will you marry me?" For a heartbeat, the world fell silent. The noise from the cafe faded, and only the wind and the hum of the city remained. Tears filled her eyes, but her smile broke through them like sunlight. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, I will." Applause erupted from the doorway behind them. The staff and customers who had gathered to watch cheered, clapping and laughing. Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands trembling. She laughed through her tears, resting her forehead against his. "You always said kindness changes everything," she murmured. He smiled. "It did. It brought me you." They stood there, wrapped in the sound of applause and the scent of coffee, while sunlight washed over them both. And as the city moved around them, Lila realized that the story she had once thought was just a coincidence had become the truest thing in her life, a story that began with kindness and ended with love. Autumn arrived softly over Seattle, tinting the trees outside Moonbeam Coffee in shades of gold and rust. A light drizzle returned, just enough to remind everyone of where this story began on a rainy night, with a stranger seeking shelter and a young woman offering warmth. Now, the cafe was busier than ever. The scent of cinnamon and roasted beans filled the air as laughter echoed from every corner. On one wall hung a framed photo from the grand opening of the Kindness Studio, and beside it, a small shelf displayed the mug that started everything. Be kind anyway. Lila Gray, no longer just Lila Tran, stood behind the counter, wearing a simple cream dress and a soft smile. Her wedding ring glimmered under the cafe lights as she poured hot chocolate for a young couple sitting near the window. They looked nervous, just like she once had on that long-ago night. Ethan sat at a nearby table, his laptop closed, a cup of coffee untouched beside him. He was still the CEO of Gray Labs, but now he spent more time here than in boardrooms. When Lila approached, wiping her hands on her apron, he looked up and smiled. "Full house today," he said. "Every day," she replied. "It still feels like a dream." He reached across the table and took her hand. "It is real. You made it real." They sat quietly, watching the customers come and go, the students, the artists, the workers, all of them, connected by one small idea that had become something much bigger. On the door, a new sign read, "Moonbeam Coffee, where kindness begins." Outside, the drizzle thickened, and a young boy rushed in, soaked from the rain. Lila handed him a towel and a cup of cocoa before he could even speak. "Here," she said gently. "No one should be wet alone." Ethan's chest tightened. It was the same sentence she had said to him years ago. Their eyes met, and they both smiled, remembering everything they had been through, the lies, the forgiveness, the rebuilding, and finally, the love that had lasted. A soft piano melody began to play from the cafe's old speaker. The room felt like a memory and a promise all at once. Ethan lifted his cup in a quiet toast. "To second chances," he said. Lila clinked her cup against his. "And to kindness that never gives up." Through the fogged windows, the city lights shimmered, reflecting across the puddles on the street. The world kept moving fast, unpredictable, but inside that little corner cafe, time seemed to slow, holding them in the glow of everything they had built together. Voiceover. She gave him her first kiss, not knowing who he was. He gave her his last name, knowing exactly who she was. In a world that often forgets, they proved one simple truth. Kindness, when real, always finds its way home.